All right, so you wanted to deep dive into the differences between men's and women's brains,
Hmm.
and you sent over a really cool article summarizing some research.
Yeah.
And I have to say, even just skimming it, I was like, oh, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like this makes a lot of sense.
It's a topic that sparks a lot of, like, you know, curiosity, sometimes even debate,
Totally.
but there's so much interesting science there.
Exactly. And so, you know how we always hear that men's brains are bigger?
Right?
Well, the article dives right into that, and it's not as simple as it sounds.
Right.
So what's the real scoop?
Well, it is true that men's brains are about 10% larger on average.
Okay.
But you can think about it this way. Like, if you have a bigger car, it's probably going to have a bigger engine.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean it's faster or more powerful,
Right.
overall.
Nah.
It's really about how all those parts work together.
Yeah.
And when it comes to brain size, isn't the main factor in intelligence.
Okay, so it's not about how much brain you have, it's how you use it.
Ye-
So what does the article say about how men and women's brains are actually wired differently?
Yeah, well, one of the key differences is in the types of brain tissue.
Okay.
So men tend to have more gray matter,
Okay.
which is like the processing power of the brain.
Gotcha.
You can imagine it kind of like the computer chips that handle all the calculations and operations.
So I'm picturing my brain like a supercomputer right now,
Is-
buzzing with activity.
Uh-huh. So men have more of these processing chips,
Yeah.
but women, on the other hand, have more white matter.
Okay.
So you can think of white matter as the network cables that connect all those processing chips together.
Oh,
It's the communication highway
okay.
that allows different areas of the brain to talk to each other.
So men might have more processing power in specific areas,
Yeah.
and women have more of like an integrated system.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Huh.
The article uses this really helpful analogy,
Okay.
comparing men's brains to a single core processor, like, great for focusing on one task at a time.
Right.
And women's brains to multi-core processors, which are
Yes.
better at handling multiple tasks simultaneously.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
I've definitely noticed that I tend to thrive when I can juggle a few different projects at once.
Uh-huh.
And I wonder if that's related to this whole like multi-core brain thing.
It could be.
What do you think, listener?
Yeah.
Do you feel like your brain is wired for multitasking or for laser focus?
Yeah. It's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
And it brings us to another interesting point about brain activity.
Okay.
Studies have shown that during multitasking and communication tasks, women's brains show more activity between the two hemispheres,
Interesting.
suggesting kind of a greater level of integration and coordination.
So maybe those late night brainstorming sessions with my girlfriends where we're bouncing ideas off each other a mile a minute are actually tapping into this unique wiring
Yeah,
in our brains.
it's possible.
But hold on, before we get too carried away with these generalizations,
Right.
the article emphasizes that these are just statistical trends, right? It's
Yeah.
not like every single woman is a multitasking master
Absolutely.
and every man is like a single-minded focus machine.
Exactly. Individual variation is huge, and we definitely don't want to fall into the trap of stereotypes.
Right.
But it's still fascinating to see these patterns emerge from the research.
For sure.
And it gives us kind of a new way to appreciate the incredible diversity of the human brain.
Absolutely. Speaking of diversity, let's talk about emotions.
Okay.
The article delves into the limbic system,
Yes.
which it describes as kind of the emotional hub
Right.
of the brain. And apparently this area tends to be more active in women.
That's what the research suggests. Yes.
Okay.
It's a complex system, but one of the key structures within the limbic system is the amygdala,
Right.
which plays a big role in processing emotions like fear and aggression.
Mm-hmm.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The article says that men actually have a larger amygdala than women.
Wait, really? That seems counterintuitive, given that we often think of women as being more in touch with their emotions.
Right.
So what's going on there?
It's a bit of a paradox, but here's the key. While men might have the larger amygdala, women have more connections between their amygdala and other areas of the brain
Okay.
that process emotions.
So it's like men might have a more intense initial reaction to a threat or a strong emotion.
Yeah,
But women are better at processing and understanding the nuances of those emotions.
that's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
Imagine the amygdala as like a smoke detector.
Okay.
So when it senses danger, it goes off. In men, that smoke detector might be louder, but in women, it's connected to a more sophisticated sprinkler system that can target the fire more precisely.
Interesting. Okay. I'm starting to see how this all fits together.
Yeah.
It's not just about the size or the activity of one brain region.
Right.
It's about how all these different parts are interconnected
Mm-hmm.
and how they communicate with each other.
Exactly. And it's this intricate web of connections that gives rise to the complex tapestry of human emotions and behaviors.
Wow.
Now, I'm curious, listener, when you experience a strong emotion,
Yeah,
how does it usually play out for you?
that's a great question.
Do you react immediately,
Yeah.
or do you take some time to process and reflect?
It probably depends on the situation and the emotion,
Uh-huh.
but I know I definitely lean towards that processing and reflecting style.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wish I could just react in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
but my brain seems to need time to analyze everything first.
There's no right or wrong way, of course.
Mm-hmm.
It's just fascinating to consider how our individual brain wiring shapes our emotional responses.
Totally. Now, speaking of how our brains handle information, let's dive into another area where we see some interesting differences, cognitive skills.
Sounds good. We've been talking about specific areas of the brain, but the real magic happens when we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the brain networks.
Okay.
So these are like super highways of information, connecting all those different regions we've been discussing and allowing them to work together in incredibly complex ways.
Okay, I'm picturing a massive network of roads and intersections with signals flashing and data zipping back and forth.
Yeah, exactly.
So how do these brain networks differ between men and women?
Well, studies have shown that men tend to have more connections within each hemisphere of the brain, so like north-south connections,
Okay.
and women have more connections between the hemispheres, so more east-west connections.
Gotcha. So men have stronger connections within a specific region, and women have more connections across different regions.
That's a great way to put it.
So it's like the difference between having a really efficient local transportation system versus a network that can get you from coast to coast.
Exactly. And it actually ties in perfectly with what we were discussing earlier about gray and white matter.
Right.
Men with their more localized gray matter, they have those strong, efficient connections within hemispheres, while women with their greater amount of white matter have those cross-hemisphere connections that facilitate that communication and integration.
So it's like those differences in wiring are giving rise to different strengths.
Exactly.
So what does this mean in terms of how men and women might approach problem solving or decision making?
Well, think of it this way. Men's brains, with their more focused internal connections, might be particularly good at tasks that require deep concentration and specialized expertise.
Okay.
So imagine a surgeon, for example,
Hmm.
who needs to be able to focus intently on a very specific area and execute precise movements.
Right.
Or a computer programmer who's writing complex code line by line.
Right.
These are tasks that often benefit from that kind of laser-focused processing power.
And women with their interconnected networks might be better at tasks that require bringing together information from different sources and kind of seeing the bigger picture.
Exactly.
So I'm thinking of fields like teaching, where you need to be able to understand individual students' needs and tailor your approach accordingly. Or social work, where you're dealing with complex family dynamics and social systems.
Right.
What do you think, listener? Do you see these network differences playing out in your own life in terms of your strengths or the types of work you're drawn to?
Yeah, it's a great question to consider.
Yeah,
Now, of course, these are just general patterns,
right.
and there are always exceptions.
Of course.
We all know brilliant female surgeons and incredibly empathetic male teachers,
For sure.
but it's fascinating to consider how these underlying brain differences might contribute to our cognitive styles and preferences.
It's like we're getting a glimpse into the operating system of our minds.
It really is.
Okay, we've talked about brain size wiring and networks.
Mm-hmm.
What else does the article highlight in terms of those key differences?
Well, there's one more factor. We can't ignore hormones.
Oh, yeah.
They often get blamed for mood swings and impulsive behavior,
Right.
but they actually play a much bigger role than that. They're powerful chemical messengers that can influence everything from our cognitive abilities to our emotional responses.
So let's start with estrogen, the primary female hormone.
Right.
What does the article say about its impact on the brain?
Well, estrogen has been shown to enhance memory, boost verbal fluency, and even protect against age-related cognitive decline.
Wow.
It also plays a crucial role in regulating emotions and social behavior.
So estrogen is like a brain-boosting multivitamin?
It kind of is.
I knew it was important for reproductive health, but I had no idea it had such a profound impact on brain function.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it just goes to show how interconnected all these systems are.
Right.
Of course, as with anything, there are two sides to the coin. Hormonal fluctuations can also bring challenges, particularly during certain phases of life.
Right.
But overall, estrogen seems to have a generally positive effect on women's cognitive health.
Now, what about testosterone, the male hormone?
Yeah,
It often gets a bad rap for fueling aggression and risk-taking behavior.
right.
But there's got to be more to the story.
Right?
I mean, we need testosterone for a reason.
Absolutely. Testosterone is essential for muscle growth, bone density, and overall physical vitality.
Okay.
But it also plays a role in shaping the brain and influencing behavior.
Okay.
Studies have linked testosterone to increased spatial awareness, problem-solving skills, and even a stronger drive to succeed.
That makes sense. I'm imagining those testosterone-fueled behaviors that might get us into trouble in some contexts.
Yeah.
Like recklessness or competitiveness
Yeah,
could actually be incredibly advantageous in others.
exactly.
It's all about how those traits are channeled and expressed.
Right. Think about our ancestors out on the savannah.
Right.
Testosterone would have given them the boldness to hunt dangerous prey and the strength to protect their families.
Right.
Those same traits might lead to some risky business deals or aggressive driving in modern society, but it's all about context.
So it's like our brains and our hormones have evolved over millennia to help us survive and thrive. And sometimes those ancient adaptations can clash with the demands of modern life.
It's a fascinating interplay, isn't it? And it brings us back to that age-old nature versus nurture debate.
Totally.
We've been talking about all these intriguing biological differences between men's and women's brains, but how much of who we are is shaped by our genes and how much is shaped by our experiences?
That's the million-dollar question. It seems like it's got to be a combination of both, right?
It is.
Our genes lay the foundation,
Yes.
but our environment and our choices shape how those genes are expressed.
Uh-huh.
It's like having a blueprint for a house. You can build a cozy cottage or a sprawling mansion depending on the materials you use and the choices you make along the way.
That's a great analogy. We're not simply products of our biology, nor are we blank slates shaped solely by our experiences. It's that dynamic dance between nature and nurture.
And speaking of how our experiences shape our brains, the article touches on some fascinating gender differences when it comes to mental health.
Yes.
What did you find most interesting about that section?
Well, what stood out to me was the fact that women are statistically more prone to conditions like depression and anxiety,
Yeah.
while men are more often diagnosed with ADHD and autism.
Why might that be?
Yeah.
Could those brain differences we've been discussing play a role?
It's certainly a possibility. You know, women's heightened limbic system activity, which makes them more attuned to emotions, could also make them more susceptible to mood disorders.
Yeah.
And men's brains, with their more localized activity and focus on systemizing, might be more vulnerable to conditions like ADHD and autism, which involve differences in attention and social interaction.
This is such a crucial point because it highlights the importance of understanding these differences, not as weaknesses,
Right.
but as different ways our brains operate.
Yeah, it really is about celebrating neurodiversity and creating a society that supports everyone in reaching their full potential, regardless of how their brain is wired.
Absolutely. It's not about saying one way is better than the other,
Right.
but rather appreciating the amazing diversity of the human brain and how that translates to all the incredible things humans can do.
You know, it's truly fascinating to me
What's that?
is the brain's incredible plasticity.
Okay.
It's not a static organ,
Right.
but it's something that's constantly changing and adapting based on our experiences.
Oh, wow.
That means we actually have the power to shape our own brains,
Really?
to strengthen connections and develop new skills throughout our lives.
That is so empowering.
It is.
It's like we have this incredible superpower right inside our heads, and we don't even realize it. We're not just stuck with the brain we were born with.
Right.
We actually have the ability to mold it and make it our own.
I think that's one of the most important takeaways from all of this research.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
let's bring it all home for you, listener. We've explored all these fascinating differences between men's and women's brains. But what does it all really mean?
Right.
Why should you care?
Well, for starters, understanding these differences can help us communicate and relate to each other better. You know, if we recognize that men and women might process information or respond to stress differently, it can lead to more empathy and understanding in our relationships.
It's almost like we're adding a whole new dimension to that, saying men are from Mars, women are from Venus.
Yeah.
Like we're starting to understand the neurological basis for those differences.
Right.
And that can be incredibly valuable, not just in our personal lives,
Uh-huh.
but also in the workplace,
Mm-hmm.
in education, in healthcare, really in every aspect of society.
Absolutely. Imagine a world where educational approaches are tailored to the different ways boys and girls learn,
Wow.
or where workplaces are designed to accommodate the unique strengths and challenges of both men and women.
Yeah,
That's the kind of future we can strive for when we embrace the diversity of the human brain.
I love that vision. So before we sign off, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question inspired by all we've learned.
Okay.
If you could rewire one aspect of your own brain, what would it be and why?
Ooh.
Would you enhance your spatial reasoning skills,
Yeah.
boost your emotional intelligence, or maybe amp up your creativity?
It's a great question to ponder as you go about your day.
It really gets to the heart of what makes us unique and how we can continue to grow and evolve throughout our lives. It's been an incredible journey exploring the intricacies of the male and female brain.
It has.
We've seen that while there are some intriguing differences,
Mm-hmm.
there's also a vast amount of overlap and individual variation.
Absolutely.
The key takeaway, we're all wired differently, and that's what makes the human experience so rich and fascinating. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep those brains buzzing.